January 1899. The High Plains of Wyoming Territory. A vast, unforgiving canvas where life was etched in stark lines of timber and toil. For generations, the settlers had built with what the land offered most readily: pine and spruce, notched logs, and hammered nails. Their homes were quick studies in necessity, raised by strong hands and stronger backs, designed to withstand the known quantities of a frontier winter. Everyone understood this unwritten law of construction, passed down through the rough-hewn wisdom of those who'd survived before. It was a rhythm, a certainty. Build with wood, build fast, endure. But not everyone heard the same drumbeat. Clara, a woman weathered by loss more than years, saw the future in a different stone. A widow, with no children to inherit the flimsy traditions of the valley, she carried a quiet conviction that felt almost alien. She had seen the bones of older worlds, had heard tales from a nomadic uncle who spoke of structures that defied time, structures not built to merely survive a season, but to outlast an epoch. His whispers of ancient, rounded forms, of interlocking stones that became one seamless skin against the world, had taken root deep within her. It wasn't just about shelter, it was about permanence in a fleeting land. Her hands, calloused not just from prairie life but from years spent poring over old, forgotten sketches and diagrams, sought a deeper truth than a simple log wall could offer. She learned the properties of shale and granite, the way different sands bound with quicklime, the alchemy of a mortar that would harden like rock itself. She understood compression, the subtle mathematics of an arch, the impossible strength of a curve. Most here built as their fathers had, with planks that groaned and settled, that cracked in the relentless sun and twisted with the freeze. Clara envisioned something that would not groan, would not crack, would not twist. She saw a defiance against the very forces that shaped this land. She saw a home that would be a silent fortress. The unspoken question hung heavy in the crisp morning air, a question that would soon be answered in a tempest of snow and ice. Would this unorthodox vision stand, or would it be another folly swallowed by the vast, indifferent plains? What do you think? Have you ever seen someone build against all common sense, only for their wild idea to prove everyone wrong? Her chosen site, a low rise overlooking the valley, became a stage for a slow, deliberate madness in the eyes of the townsfolk. "Clara, what in tarnation are you doing?" Jebediah, his hands perpetually stained with pine tar from his own sturdy cabin, had asked one crisp autumn morning, his voice thick with a blend of concern and outright bewilderment. He gestured to the growing, peculiar mound of rough-hewn stone Clara was meticulously arranging. "That ain't how we build here." "Wood, Clara, wood is what keeps the cold out, keeps a body warm." His wife, Martha, nodded vigorously from the porch of their cabin, a silent chorus to his pronouncements. Clara, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of a gloved hand, merely continued to fit a particularly stubborn piece of local river rock into place. "Wood burns, Jebediah. Wood rots. Wood lets the wind through every gap and knot," she replied, her voice low but clear, carrying the ring of absolute certainty. "Stone endures. Stone holds the earth's heat and keeps the bitter out." Her plan was deceptively simple on paper, monstrous in its execution for a lone woman. A domed structure, rising from a perfectly circular foundation, its walls tapering inward to form a self-supporting shell. No rafters, no trusses, no timber frame to speak of, save for the temporary scaffolding and doorframe. Each stone, carefully selected, had to be shaped, sometimes with days of patient chipping, to fit its exact place in the expanding curve. She spoke of thermal mass and structural integrity, words that floated like foreign birds over the plains, lost on ears accustomed to plumb line and square corner. The community, initially curious, quickly devolved into a chorus of bemused dismissal. "She'll be frozen solid before that thing's half done," Martha had confided to a group of women gathered for a quilting bee. Lost her senses after poor Joseph passed, bless his soul. The men, meanwhile, offered unsolicited advice, mostly thinly veiled warnings. "That dome will just shed snow right off, Clara, bury your door in a drift." Another neighbor, Amos, had bellowed across the clearing one afternoon, leaning on his axe handle, enjoying the small crowd his pronouncement had drawn. "You'll be trapped in there like a gopher in a burrow." Each jeer, each mocking laugh, each pitying glance, was another layer of mortar in Clara's resolve. She knew the ridicule was born of fear, fear of the unknown, fear of breaking from tradition, fear of anything that challenged the hard-won certainties of their lives. But certainty, Clara understood, could also be a cage. The autumn deepened, painting the distant hills in hues of rust and gold, and still, Clara chipped and stacked, each day a slow, painstaking triumph over gravity and doubt. The first true test, she knew, would come soon enough. As the weeks bled into late autumn, the peculiar stone structure on Clara's rise began to take a discernible shape. It wasn't the neat, rectilinear block of a typical frontier home. Instead, it swelled from the earth like a colossal beehive, each layer of rock a testament to a quiet, relentless will. Old Man Hemlock, a taciturn individual who lived on the edge of the settlement and hired himself out for the heaviest tasks, was Clara's only consistent helper. He never questioned, never scoffed. He simply lifted the stones she pointed to, mixed the mortar to her exacting specifications, and watched with a steady, unreadable gaze. Clara taught him the intricacies of the arch, how each stone, or the voussoir, as she called them, was angled to direct weight outward and downward, binding the whole into an unyielding shell. "See, Hemlock," she'd explained, pointing with a gloved finger to the precisely cut joint, "this isn't just stacking. This is compression. Each piece pushes against the next, and the curve takes all that force and sends it to the ground. This isn't just a wall, it's a single, solid piece, growing from the earth itself." She would measure each angle with a homemade plumb bob and a carefully marked straightedge, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. The mixture of sand, lime, and local clay for her mortar was a secret concoction, mixed in specific ratios, left to cure for precise durations. "It's the glue, Hemlock, but it's also the cushion," she'd said, pressing a fresh dollop into a seam. "It needs to breathe, but never give way. This isn't like the mud you plaster between logs. This will set like rock, become part of the rock." Meanwhile, the community's disquiet grew. It began as murmurs over coffee at the general store, then escalated to more pointed questions from Ezekiel, the stern, self-appointed elder of their small, scattered populace. Clara, Ezekiel had stated one Sunday after services, his voice booming with the weight of communal expectation, "We are a God-fearing folk, and we build as we always have. Your structure. It defies the very nature of what a home should be. It looks like a tomb, or a pagan temple, rather than a place of warmth and family." The implied condemnation was clear. Clara's eccentricity was bordering on apostasy. "It's a home, Ezekiel," Clara had responded, her gaze steady, designed to protect against the harshness of God's own winter. Her defiance was not loud, but it was unyielding. The mockery took on an edge of moral judgment. Children were told to stay away from Miss Clara's Folly. Women avoided her at the weekly market, their eyes flicking from her worn, pragmatic clothing to the peculiar, un-American shape rising on her property. The air, already thin and cold, grew thick with unspoken accusations. Yet, Clara and Hemlock continued, placing stone after stone, building not just a house, but a declaration. Each measured dimension, each carefully chosen and placed rock, was a silent answer to the rising tide of skepticism and scorn, a physical manifestation of her conviction. The days shortened, and a palpable shift descended upon the Wyoming plains. The air, which had held the last vestiges of autumn's crispness, began to bite with a nascent, unfamiliar chill. Old Man Hemlock, rarely given to pronouncements, pointed to the western sky one evening, where a bruised, leaden purple bled into the fading light. "Never seen colors like that so early in the year, Clara," he rumbled, his voice low, a tremor of unease beneath the words. "My grandpappy used to say when the sky bleeds like that, it means the world's fixing to get a hard shaking." The old-timers in the valley, usually stoic and dismissive of anything beyond their immediate experience, began to exchange worried glances. Josiah, the oldest among them, his face a roadmap of sun and wind, spoke of a peculiar stillness that settled over the land, a quiet before a storm that felt different, more profound, than any he'd known. The deer, usually bold in their foraging, descended from the higher ridges earlier than usual, congregating in the sheltered valleys, their eyes wide and nervous. Birds, too, migrated with an unusual urgency, their flights a desperate streak across the vast, indifferent sky. Rumors spread through the settlement like a creeping frost, the trappers from the north say the snow's already shoulder-deep in the passes. Martha heard from her cousin down south that the rivers are freezing solid faster than anyone's ever seen. The whispers of an unusually harsh winter intensified, morphing from common frontier chatter into something more ominous, something with the weight of ancient prophecy. For the first time, a sliver of genuine anxiety began to cut through the community's usual bravado. Their wooden cabins, which had always been good enough, suddenly seemed less secure, their reliance on readily available timber less a triumph of practicality and more a potential vulnerability. The cheerful crackle of log fires began to sound less comforting and more like a desperate, ceaseless demand for more fuel. Clara, meanwhile, observed the natural world with a heightened sense of anticipation. Her stone dome, now complete and sealed against the elements, stood like a mute sentinel on the rise, its rounded form a stark contrast to the angular, vulnerable lines of the wooden homes below. Inside, the thick stone walls held a constant, earthy coolness, a promise of insulation against the coming onslaught. She stockpiled provisions, checked the sealant around her heavy, reinforced door, and cleared the small, protected entrance vestibule. There was no fear in her actions, only a quiet, meticulous preparedness. The ridicule from her neighbors had not vanished, but it was now laced with a new, unsettling undercurrent of dread. The test was no longer an abstract future event, it was a gathering force on the horizon, a palpable entity drawing closer with each passing day. The land itself, with its peculiar omens and darkening skies, seemed to hold its breath. The world, indeed, was fixing to get a hard shaking, and every living thing felt it. Then, it hit. Not a gentle snow, not even a fierce blizzard like the plains had seen before. This was a cataclysm, a white hammer blow from the north that descended with a primal roar. January 1899 became synonymous with the Great Blizzard, a name etched into the very memory of the high plains. It began with an almost immediate plunge in temperature, dropping so rapidly it felt like the very air was freezing solid around them. Then came the snow, not falling in flakes, but driven horizontally by winds that shrieked like banshees, a blinding, suffocating wall of white. Outside Clara's stone dome, the world dissolved into a maelstrom. The wind, now a living, malevolent entity, hammered against the thick stone, but the rounded surfaces offered no purchase, no flat face to catch and tear. It simply flowed around the dome, screaming past, its fury diffused. Inside, a profound, almost eerie silence reigned. The thick walls absorbed the howling gale, transforming its deafening assault into a muted, distant growl, like a restless beast far off. The temperature, though chilly, held steady, a testament to the stone's thermal mass. No draft snaked through unseen cracks, no icy fingers crept under a loose windowpane. Clara moved about her small, circular home, tending the small, efficient fire in her hearth, its warmth radiating gently into the insulated space. Meanwhile, across the valley, terror unfolded. In Jebediah's cabin, the wind found every gap. It tore at the clapboards, whistling through the ill-fitting windows, raising the floorboards with a relentless, percussive thud. Martha huddled by the roaring stove, piling blankets onto her shaking children, but the heat seemed to vanish the moment it left the iron, swallowed by the insatiable cold seeping through the thin wooden walls. A rifle-shot crack split the air, and a section of their roof groaned ominously, threatening to buckle under the impossible weight of the accumulating snow. At Amos's homestead, the situation was grimmer. A weakened corner post, compromised by years of sun and rain, splintered under a massive drift, and a section of his wall simply caved inward with a terrifying sigh of collapsing timber. The blizzard immediately invaded, coating everything in a fine, icy powder, extinguishing his small lantern and plunging them into freezing darkness and chaos. His wife shrieked, their cries swallowed by the wind's insatiable hunger. Elsewhere, a cow shed, built with less care than a human dwelling, simply disintegrated, scattering timbers like kindling across the frozen landscape. The screams of livestock were brief, brutal interruptions in the wind's continuous roar. Each vignette, a snapshot of escalating catastrophe, painted a stark picture of wood's inherent vulnerability. The blizzard was not just a storm, it was a judge, and it was rendering its verdict swiftly and brutally, exposing the fragile certainties of a community that had built on tradition rather than foresight. The valley was plunged into an unimaginable ordeal, a test of survival against a force none had truly prepared for. The Great Blizzard of 1899 raged for 3 days, a white inferno that devoured the familiar landscape and swallowed all sound. Inside Clara's stone dome, the silence was almost unnerving, broken only by the gentle hiss of the small fire and the rhythmic tick of a pocket watch. She sat by the hearth, reading a worn book by the flickering light, a quiet defiance in her posture. The internal temperature remained a steady, bearable 45 degrees Fahrenheit, a stark contrast to the rapidly plummeting mercury outside, which dropped to unthinkable lows, even freezing rivers in the deep south. The thick stone walls, 1.5 feet deep, acted as a thermal battery, slowly radiating the stored warmth of the earth and the meager fire. There was no wind whistling through her home, no snow piling against interior walls, no desperate struggle to keep a flame alive against an encroaching chill. Her food stores, carefully laid out on cool stone shelves, remained untouched by frost, a quiet assurance of sustenance. Each morning, Clara would venture into her small, enclosed vestibule, a buffer zone between her haven and the maelstrom, and clear the packed snow from her reinforced door. It was a chore, but not a battle. The dome, a single, monolithic form, simply presented an unyielding face to the storm, deflecting its fury rather than resisting it head-on. She ate her simple meals, drank hot tea, and watched the tiny, mesmerizing dance of the flames, knowing that beyond her stone sanctuary, a world was breaking apart. The silence of her dome became a profound counterpoint to the imagined chaos outside, a testament to the power of foresight and the enduring strength of ancient principles applied with modern precision. This quiet survival was not born of luck, but of meticulous planning, of understanding the earth itself, and of a conviction that had been mocked and dismissed. The dome was not just shelter, it was a living demonstration of a different kind of wisdom, standing firm and resolute while the very foundations of the community's conventional wisdom crumbled in the face of an unprecedented Arctic fury. On the 4th day, the wind began to subside, its banshee wail softening to a mournful sigh, then to a whisper. The sky, which had been a suffocating blanket of white, slowly began to lighten, revealing a landscape utterly transformed. Snowdrifts, sculpted by the relentless wind, rose like frozen dunes, taller than any man, swallowing entire cabins and reshaping the contours of the valley. Clara emerged from her dome into a world of pristine, terrifying beauty. The air was still lethally cold, but the violence had ceased. She strapped on snowshoes and began the arduous trek towards the settlement, her heart heavy with dread for what she would find. What she found was devastation. Jebediah's cabin, which had always seemed so sturdy, was a skeletal ruin, one wall completely gone, buried under a colossal drift. His family huddled, shivering and frostbitten, around a pathetic smoking fire, their faces blue with cold and shock. "Clara!" Martha cried, her voice cracked and thin, "We thought we were goners." The roof nearly collapsed, and the wind just tore right through everything. Jebediah, usually so robust, simply stared, his eyes wide and vacant. "The cattle, all gone," he murmured, his voice hoarse with despair. "Frozen solid in the barn. Or what's left of it." Further on, Amos's house was little more than a pile of shattered timbers, his family having taken refuge in a neighbor's equally compromised dwelling, desperately trying to keep warm. The moral authority, Ezekiel, typically so imposing, sat on an overturned bucket outside his own home, which, though still standing, was badly damaged, its windows blown out, its interior coated in a layer of fine, icy snow. He looked up at Clara, his usual bluster replaced by a profound, humbled exhaustion. "Clara," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "your dome, it stood, didn't it?" Like a rock, the words were an admission, a confession of profound error. The community, once vibrant and self-assured, was now a tableau of ruin and despondency. Homes, built with generations of inherited knowledge, had been found wanting, their wooden frames no match for the raw, untamed power of the blizzard. The stark contrast between the ravaged settlement and Clara's untouched, silent sentinel on the rise was undeniable, a physical manifestation of a moral lesson delivered with brutal force. The silence that had protected Clara now descended upon the valley, a heavy quiet born of shock and loss, broken only by the occasional wail of a child or the desperate cough of an elder. The immediate aftermath was a blur of survival and desperate triage. Clara, her dome a beacon of warmth, became an unlikely focal point for the shattered community. She and Old Man Hemlock, who had also weathered the storm in his small but well-built stone root cellar, worked tirelessly. Clara's dome, once ridiculed as a tomb, transformed into a makeshift infirmary and temporary shelter for the most vulnerable. She shared her carefully rationed provisions, her steady hands and quiet demeanor a source of calm amidst the widespread panic. Martha, her children shivering under layers of blankets, looked at Clara with an entirely new gaze. "Clara, how did you know?" she asked, her voice thick with gratitude and shame. We thought you were foolish." Clara simply offered a small, weary smile. "The earth knows, Martha. And the stone listens. We just have to learn its language." Her words were not boastful, but a simple statement of fact, a truth forged in the crucible of the storm. The immediate lesson was stark. Wood, the undisputed king of frontier building, had failed spectacularly. The blizzard, later known as the Great Arctic Outbreak of 1899, had brought temperatures to historic lows across a vast swathe of the country, crippling infrastructure and claiming countless lives. Even areas far to the south, like Florida, saw record-breaking cold and snow. The very notion of good enough had been brutally exposed. The survivors, many of them frostbitten and traumatized, began to look at their surroundings, and at Clara's dome, with new eyes. The mockery was replaced by a hesitant, then urgent, curiosity. "You said a thermal mass, Clara," Jebediah stammered one afternoon, his voice still weak but his mind clearly turning to practical matters. "What exactly does that mean? How did this stone, keep the cold out so completely?" This was the beginning of the great reversal. The questions were no longer posed with scorn, but with genuine, desperate hunger for knowledge. Clara, ever patient, began to explain, her voice calm and clear, walking them through the principles of her design, the properties of the stone, the wisdom of the curve. The immediate need was shelter, but the deeper need was understanding, a desire to learn how to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. The humbling process had begun. As the snows slowly began to recede, revealing the true extent of the devastation, the transformation in the community's attitude toward Clara and her stone dome became complete. What had been skepticism and ridicule was now admiration and a profound desire to learn. Ezekiel, once the stern arbiter of tradition, sought Clara out daily. "Clara," he admitted, his face etched with genuine contrition, "we were blind. We clung to what we knew, and we paid a terrible price. Your knowledge, it saved lives. My own family would have suffered far worse, if not for the temporary shelter you provided, and the simple fact that your methods work." He paused, looking toward the dome, now standing proud and serene against the slowly warming sky. "Tell me, Clara, how can I learn this? How can we build again, but build right?" This was the pivot, the moment of true moral reversal. The institutional pressure, once directed at condemning Clara, now became an engine for change. Other families, seeing the undeniable proof of the dome's resilience, began to approach her. "My boy, Samuel," a woman named Eleanor confessed, "he's always had a knack with stones, but his father always steered him to lumber. Could he help you, Clara? Learn from you?" Clara, though still quiet, found herself becoming a teacher, her knowledge no longer an isolated oddity but a vital community resource. She organized lessons in basic geology, in the art of mortar mixing, in the precise geometry of an arch. Young Samuel, previously deemed merely strong, revealed a keen eye for fitting stones, a natural aptitude for the principles Clara had mastered. He became her first, eager apprentice, asking practical questions that served to explain the complex concepts to the wider, listening audience. "So, the round shape, Miss Clara," he asked one afternoon, carefully setting a stone, "it means there's no weak corners for the wind to grab, right? And the weight just pushes everything down, not out." Clara smiled, a rare, genuine expression of satisfaction. "Precisely, Samuel. No flat surfaces to catch the wind, and the compression holds it all as one. It's a dance with gravity, not a fight." The new builds in the valley, slow and painstaking, began to reflect Clara's methods. Foundations were dug deeper, local stone was harvested, and the subtle curve of a supportive arch began to appear in door frames and window openings, a silent acknowledgement of a hard-won lesson. The fear of breaking tradition was replaced by the fear of repeating past mistakes. Years passed, and the scar of the Great Blizzard of 1899 faded, but the lessons it carved into the Wyoming plains endured. The small settlement, once a cluster of vulnerable wooden boxes, slowly transformed. Now, interspersed among the rebuilt timber structures, stood new homes, robust and rounded, built partially or entirely of stone, their forms echoing Clara's pioneering dome. They weren't all perfect replicas, but each bore the mark of her influence, a testament to the quiet strength of her conviction. The valley, which had once mocked her folly, now honored her foresight. Her dome, still standing firm and unyielding against the relentless march of seasons, became a silent monument, a symbol of resilience and the triumph of practical innovation over entrenched tradition. Clara herself, no longer seen as merely eccentric, became a revered figure, a living library of forgotten knowledge. Children would visit her, not out of fear or derision, but with wide-eyed curiosity, asking about the great cold and the stone house that stood. She would tell them stories of the earth's wisdom, of the enduring strength found in unexpected places, and of the importance of listening to the land. The community had learned humility, and with it, a newfound preparedness. Stockpiles of stone sat near every new construction site, and the sound of hammers shaping rock became as common as the ring of an axe. They had faced a crisis that delivered consequences quickly, revealing the fragility of their old ways. Now, the old wisdom mingled with the new, creating a stronger, more resilient way of life. The story of Clara and her stone dome became a parable, whispered around winter fires, a moral lesson about respecting unfamiliar expertise and the profound truth that sometimes, the most radical ideas are simply the ones most deeply rooted in understanding the world around us. It was a story of a woman who built not just a house, but a legacy, demonstrating that true strength often lies not in conforming to the crowd, but in having the quiet courage to stand firm, like stone, against the coming storm. Her quiet triumph, once a lonely achievement, had diffused into the very fabric of their existence, a permanent shift in how they saw their homes, their community, and their place in the vast, beautiful, and unforgiving Wild West.